There's one. Oh, big slab, big slab. All right, guys, we are getting back to the basics today. We are doing some spawning bluegill fishing here in northern Wisconsin. Some of the most spectacular bluegill fishing of the entire year. And right there is the target. That is what we're after. Big old slab gills. So much fun. Great way to get kids into the sport of fishing. A lot of us grew up fishing for these fish, especially during the spawn. Our parents or grandparents took us out. And it's one of the most fun ways to fish that I can think of because it's so visual. You can see the fish and they're right there. They're not leaving. You don't have to look for them too hard. And it's just a blast. So that said, you know, a lot of people think fishing for spawning bluegills is cheating. And to me, it is easy to catch these fish on live bait. But I'm gonna go over the basics as well as a few fun techniques to catch these fish other ways, including fly fishing and a couple of different artificial lure techniques that make it a lot more challenging and a lot more fun. So let's get into it, guys. Back to the basics, catching bluegills on the beds. It's going to be a pattern here for a while. They're just starting, so it'll be a great thing to do here for the next month or so in northern Wisconsin. Oh, there's one. So much fun. So much fun. These things fight like crazy. Oh, another slab. Look at that, guys. So let's get into it. Getting back to the basics, catching bluegills. All right, guys, let's talk the basics of the bluegill spawn. So bluegills typically spawn in water less than 8 feet deep, oftentimes as shallow as a foot or two, and they're usually going to spawn on some sort of sand. Maybe gravel, maybe a little bit hard bottom mud, but they're not going to spawn in muck and they're not going to spawn in rock. So you're looking for those areas where you can find a sandy bottom, oftentimes along docks or a hard bottom shoreline. That's what you're looking for. And you also want to be fairly close to deep water typically. These bluegills aren't going to spawn on a really shallow flat way up in the shallow water. They like to be able to kind of move off to deeper water relatively quickly. So one of the best tools that I use to find these bluegill spawning areas is actually the Omnia fishing app. And the reason this is so handy is you can check a couple unique things with this app. You can check bottom hardness, so you can look for those harder bottom areas where these bluegills are likely to spawn. So before you even go to the lake, you can know kind of the general areas that aren't going to be too mucky. And then the second thing you can use is now the surface temperature mapping. So we can have a really good idea of whether or not these lakes are going to be close to being ready for these fish to spawn without even actually having to go to the lake and check the temperature. We can check surface temps right on the Omnia app and get a good idea of where these temps are at. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to give you a very close indication of whether you're within 5 or 10 degrees of when these fish are going to be spawning. So again, I'll leave a link below for that app. It's a great app. The pro features are awesome on it. You can shop right from the app. You get a 10% cash back on everything if you're a pro user. So it's a great app for many reasons, but I especially love the mapping for finding these spawning bluegill areas. Best way to look for bluegill beds is just to look with your trolling motor on high on a warm, sunny, calm day, and you can cruise the shallows and just look for these depressions. Definitely a good pair of polarized sunglasses works well for this, and you can see into the water, and you're looking for groups of those dish plate sized holes in the sand, and they'll often appear whiter or lighter colored than the surrounding bottom, and that's where those fish have kind of fanned out an area to lay the eggs and for the males to guard that nest. Now, bluegills typically spawn in colonies, so they're going to be in groups of, you know, maybe half a dozen to up to 100 beds in one colony, and they're often very easy to spot. That just kind of gives those fish protection from predators and helps them defend those nests as a group rather than individually trying to keep other fish away from their eggs and such. So now they're usually going to spawn near some sort of cover. Not necessarily in the cover, but near cover. So a little weed patch, they'll spawn by docks, they'll spawn by brush, anything that kind of blocks one side or the other of their colony oftentimes, that's what you're looking for. Now, as far as when the bluegills spawn, the spawn typically kicks off around 68 degree water temps. And
You know, you may see bluegills spawning, or at least getting ready to spawn and fanning beds out sooner than that, especially if you get a huge spike in temperature, some really warm days. That water might be 65 and you'll see fish moving up and starting to fan beds out. And then that spawn will progress. There may be waves of bluegills coming into different areas of the lake for up to a month. We've caught spawning bluegills in July. We've caught spawning bluegills in May. It just depends on your lake and kind of how those bluegills act in your body of water. So, all right, guys, so that pretty much covers where they spawn, when they spawn, all that good stuff. Let's get into live bait just a little bit, and then I'm going to cover more in depth on some of the artificial techniques we're using to catch these bluegills. But basically, the live bait technique is super simple. All you need is a number 6 or 8 octopus hook on a 4 or 6 pound leader with a little BB size split shot about 12 inches above that. You're going to hook a half a crawler or a small leech on there, and you're just going to pitch it into that bedding area, into that colony, and it probably won't even hit the bottom before you'll start catching bluegills on that. Now, this is going to deep hook fish, so you will have to plan on keeping some of these fish. If you want to have less chance of deep hooking the fish, use small circle hooks. And I did a whole video on how to fish for spawning bluegills with circle hooks. I'll leave a link down below for that because it does work, and it's a very effective way to target these fish if you don't want to deep hook as many fish. All right, guys, let's go over the slip float rig real quick. So it's basically the same thing on the terminal end. You're going to use that same 6 or 8 octopus hook, 4 to 6 pound test leader, only about 12 inches long. The reason we want to do a shorter leader on this than we would for walleyes is because when we drop that slip float in, we're oftentimes fishing super shallow, and if our leader's too long, it's going to hit the bottom and your float's not going to actually sit upright, so it won't work properly. So we're going to shorten everything up compared to what we would use for walleyes, and we're going to use a little more weight than we were using on the split shot rig just to float that bobber properly. You want it floating upright and just barely above the water, so when those bluegills take the bait, they don't feel resistance. And then you're going to slide your split shot fairly close to the hook, probably about 6 inches down, and that's just going to help that bait get down to the fish really quick. So you're going to pitch that bobber out there, that bait's going to shoot down to the bottom where the fish are and get past those small fish. And this is a great way for kids, you know, who may not be able to feel the bite well. They can watch that bobber and watch it go down. And also it works really well in areas where you've got maybe a lot of muck or weeds and stuff, and you want to keep that bait above the bottom and not let it get tangled. So that's a good method also for like fishing fish that are bedding in the reeds. You can kind of pitch it in there and vertically fish a little bit more. You don't have to rely on kind of pulling that bait through those bulrushes. You can just get that bobber right above the fish, drop it in there, and it won't sink to the bottom right away. So that's your other live bait rig. Now, again, if you want to keep some fish, these are great. If you want to release fish and not deep hook them, these next few artificial techniques are going to be better for you. So let's get into those now.
All right, guys, so the first artificial bait method we're talking about is plastics. This is one of my favorite panfish plastics right here. It's the 2-inch Eurotackle B-Vibe swim bait. I've just got that on the Eurotackle swing head, and I've got it text posed, so when the bluegills eat that, it's easy for them to get the hook in their mouth, and it's set back far enough that even short striking bluegills are going to get hooked on that really sharp hook. So I'm just going to locate my bluegills, which I've done. There's a bunch of beds right here. I'm going to flip this out, let it sink to bottom, and I'm just going to slowly retrieve it over the top of these beds, and these bluegills will just thump it when it hits their bed. Oh, missed one. When it gets over them, bluegills absolutely crush this bait, and it seems big. It seems big for a bluegill, but they have no problem eating this bait. Now, you're not going to catch a gazillion doing this. You're going to catch the most aggressive fish. So using a larger plastic like this kind of weeds out some of the fish. You're going to get the most aggressive, probably biggest fish, and then once they figure out that this bait is artificial, they're going to start ignoring it. So, oh, this guy's going around my boat here. There's a nice chunker. But this bait is definitely not too big for bluegills. They have no problem eating this 2-inch B-Vibe. I've caught many nice bluegills on it, and it's no different during the spawn. but they do figure it out eventually, and they're not going to keep biting it all day. They're going to stop hitting it after a little while. So you might catch, like I said, 3, 4, 5 fish off a bedding area and then just move on. And that kind of ensures that you're not overfishing the bedding area too, which is also kind of nice. But it's a fun way to catch them, a little bit different, and definitely works. All right guys, so the second way that we can rig a plastic is on a slip float. And it's the same exact slip float we were using for live bait, except this time I put a little ice jig on there. And this is basically one of my favorite combos for ice fishing. It's the Euro Tackle ESR Nano and the Plankton. I'll put a link in the description for that little guy. And I'm just gonna hover this thing just above the bottom, pitch it out over the bedding area, and watch right away, because a lot of times they'll hit it as soon as it drops over their bed. So be watching right away as it lands. If you don't get a bite, just pull it towards yourself a little bit, give it some twitches, and just work it across that bedding area. And as soon as that float goes down, you got to set the hook right away, because these fish are not going to hold on to the bait long. There we go. As soon as that thing goes down, you hammer them. And this is a great way to catch more finicky fish on plastics that won't chase that moving bait. That's going to get your a little bit more not aggressive bluegills that wouldn't eat that bigger one. So we're just going to pitch it back there, right into the bedding area. Start working it back. There we go. Just as soon as that thing goes down, you got to hammer them. Oh, this feels like a nice one. The St. Croix slipping rig is the perfect rod for this. Oh yeah, that's a tank. That's a tank. There you go, guys. Another nice northern Wisconsin bluegill. Really solid fish. And this is a great way to catch them, especially if you don't want to mess with live bait. And it's a lot cleaner. You don't have to worry about your hands getting dirty and your boat getting dirty. Just a little ice jig under an ice float. Now let's get to another way to catch them that's an absolute blast. All right guys, one of the most fun ways to catch these spawning bluegills is on a little panfish size, trout size jerk bait. This is the Euro Tackle Z Spender. I'm talking a lot about Euro Tackle, but they just make the best panfish lures there is for micro finesse. I mean, that's their thing. So again, I'll leave a link for this bait in the description. I've caught so many crappies and bluegills on this little jerk bait. But I choose perch because I feel like bluegills are used to being annoyed by little perch, and it's kind of one of those things that they hate, which is kind of what you want when you're fishing bluegills on beds. And a lot of people don't think of a jerk bait as a bluegill bait, but 100% I have caught a lot of bluegills on this bait, not only during the spawn, but also other times of year. So and we're just going to work this like we normally would work any jerk bait. Just a jerk pause, retrieve. There's one, just like that. Right on the pause. And you talk about fun. Catching any fish on jerk baits is fun. But when you can catch big bluegills like that on a jerk bait, it's an absolute blast. I love that pause, twitch pause, twitch pause.
So there's 3 ways you guys can use artificial lures to catch these fish that are all a blast. Now I'm going to get into fly fishing just a little bit here for you fly guys or guys who want to try fly fishing, and I do recommend it because it's a lot of fun. All you really need is a 5-weight fly rod, like a 8/6, 9-foot 5-weight fly rod. I'm using 6-pound tippet typically, and some sort of brightly colored nymph fly or ant fly. The fish aren't too picky on the fly. I like bright colors because I can see that fly disappear when a fish eats it if it's a calm sunny day, and that helps me kind of track that fly and where it's moving through that bedding area. So all we're really going to do is we're just going to cast that fly out past the colony, let it sink, and then pull it slowly into the bedding area. Maybe give it a few twitches just with your left hand, but really not going to do a lot of action on the bait. We're just going to let it kind of drift into the area. And anything drifting into these bluegill beds, their fish are going to pick up and try and eat. So it's a blast catching them on a fly rod. They're so fun to fight. It's a good target to cast at, and I highly recommend trying fly fishing for these bluegills. So there you go, guys. There's a whole bunch of ways you can go out and target spawning bluegills. Now you know where to find them, how to catch them. So go have a blast. But before you do, just take into consideration that these fish are very, very vulnerable to overfishing when they're on beds. And it's not so concerning that the fish are not going to have a successful spawn, because bluegills typically do have successful spawns. It's more removing those big fish from the system in large numbers at a time that we want to be careful of. So I don't recommend going and catching limit after limit when they're on beds. You want to catch a meal, that's great, but release some of those fish. Don't overfish one colony. Let a few stay on each colony and guard those nests and get bigger. So that's my advice for you as far as keeping fish. Keep it to a minimum this time of year and don't harass those fish too much. So thanks for watching, guys. So again, I have lots more videos like this one, so make sure you subscribe and watch for the next one. I'll leave another one right here for you guys. Catch you later. Get hooked up.